You guys just keep asking for the more Reddit stories. So, I'm ready with the new tale. Let's read some cool, interesting cheating wife Reddit stories. And guys, I'm trying to hit 1,000 subs before the end of the year, and I think we can do it. So please subscribe and let's get straight into this one.
The suburban neighborhood of Willow Heights looked idyllic. Rows of pristine houses sat neatly along manicured lawns, the kind of place where everyone waved to each other but whispered behind closed doors. In one such house, the facade of perfection hid a marriage teetering on the edge of collapse. Marcus and Elaine had been married for 10 years. Marcus was a hard-edged man, the kind whose intensity drew people in but also kept them at arm's length. He ran his own construction business, often leaving him rough and stern, but he prided himself on providing for his wife. Elaine, on the other hand, was a strikingly beautiful woman with sharp eyes and a cunning smile that could disarm anyone. She had once been the envy of the neighborhood, but over the years, the cracks in their marriage had become visible to those paying attention. Their relationship had grown cold, riddled with mistrust and unmet needs. Marcus suspected that Elaine wasn't happy with him anymore, though she always put on a pleasant act when company came over. She had a way of making everything seem fine while silently pulling strings behind the scenes. But he never had concrete evidence, just a nagging intuition that something was off. The plumbers arrived one morning. Marcus left for a 3-day work trip out of town, tasked with overseeing a major construction project. Before leaving, he kissed Elaine goodbye, though the gesture felt perfunctory rather than passionate. As his truck roared away, Elaine watched him go, her lips curving into a mischievous smile. That afternoon, the plumbing in the upstairs bathroom sprung a leak. Elaine called a local service, and 2 plumbers arrived within the hour. They were brothers, Jake and Chris, muscular, confident, and not shy about their flirtations. Elaine, wearing a silk robe that left little to the imagination, welcomed them in. "Thank God you're here," she said breathlessly, feigning distress. "My husband's away, and I'm helpless when it comes to this sort of thing." Jake, the older of the 2, smirked. "Don't worry, ma'am. We'll take care of everything." As the brothers worked upstairs, Elaine hovered, offering them cold drinks and making suggestive comments. Her laughter echoed through the house, a sound Marcus hadn't heard in years. It didn't take long for the innocent banter to escalate into something far more dangerous. Crossing the line by evening, the repairs were supposedly complete, but the plumbers didn't leave. Elaine had invited them to stay for dinner, pouring them glass after glass of wine. The boundaries blurred, and soon the atmosphere in the house turned electric. What started as harmless flirting spiraled into a night of indulgence, with Elaine abandoning any pretense of fidelity. Upstairs, the 3 of them laughed and whispered in hushed tones. Elaine felt a rush of adrenaline she hadn't felt in years, a reckless thrill at doing something forbidden. Jake and Chris were more than willing participants, reveling in the decadence of the moment. Marcus's unease meanwhile, miles away, Marcus sat in his motel room, staring at his phone. Something gnawed at him, a sense of unease he couldn't shake. Elaine hadn't called to check in, which was unusual. Normally, she'd at least feigned concern about his trip. He dialed her number, but it went straight to voicemail. Suspicious, he called again and left a curt message. "Elaine, call me back. I need to talk to you." When no reply came, Marcus's temper began to simmer. He hated being ignored, especially by her. As the night dragged on, his mind raced with possibilities, each one darker than the last. He considered calling one of the neighbors to check on her but dismissed the idea. He didn't want to appear paranoid. Instead, he poured himself a drink and tried to push the unease aside. But Marcus's gut instincts were rarely wrong. Unusual clues back at the house. Elaine and the plumbers had fallen asleep in a tangle of sheets. The room reeked of wine and sweat, evidence of their transgressions. But amidst the haze of her reckless choices, Elaine had overlooked something crucial: her phone. Elaine had forgotten to mute her security cameras, which Marcus could access remotely. Although the cameras didn't cover the bedrooms, they captured enough: Elaine greeting the plumbers in her robe, their flirtations in the kitchen, and the 3 of them disappearing upstairs. Marcus received an automatic alert on his phone, notifying him of unusual activity. Bleary-eyed and slightly buzzed, Marcus opened the app and watched the footage. His face darkened as he pieced together what was happening. The timestamp on the video didn't lie, nor did the suggestive body language. Rage bubbled inside him, a white-hot fury that made his hands tremble. But Marcus wasn't the type to act impulsively, not yet. He closed the app, his mind already racing with plans. He didn't just want to confront Elaine. He wanted to make her pay. Marcus barely slept that night, pacing the cramped motel room as his anger grew more focused, more lethal. Every time he thought of Elaine's laughter or the sight of her in that silky robe, his fists clenched. He was no saint, but he had always honored his vows. For her to humiliate him in their own home, to degrade what little was left of their marriage, it was unforgivable. But Marcus wasn't one to explode in blind fury. He was calculating, a man who believed revenge was best served with precision. He would play the long game, ensuring Elaine never saw it coming. The unexpected ally early the next morning, Marcus packed his things and left the motel. He didn't return to the job site, nor did he head straight home. Instead, he drove to the local diner near Willow Heights, a spot where gossip flowed as freely as the coffee. Sitting in his usual booth was Alan, his old friend and occasional confidant. Alan had a reputation as a tech-savvy private investigator, someone who could dig up dirt and make it stick. The two had bonded years ago over their mutual disdain for liars. Alan looked up from his plate of pancakes and raised an eyebrow as Marcus slid into the booth. "What brings you here? Shouldn't you be off building something?" Marcus didn't answer immediately. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and played the security footage. Alan watched in silence, his expression growing darker by the second. "Damn," Alan muttered, leaning back. "That's bold. She didn't even try to hide it." Marcus's jaw tightened. "I need you to help me. I want everything. Phone records, emails, anything you can dig up. And I want to know who those bastards are." Alan smirked. "You want to go nuclear?" Marcus nodded. "I want her life in ruins." Alan didn't hesitate. "Give me 24 hours. Elaine's blissful ignorance while Marcus schemed, Elaine basked in the afterglow of her reckless night. By the time she woke up, the plumbers were gone, having left a scribbled thank you note on the kitchen counter. She smiled to herself, feeling exhilarated and free. Marcus's absence had given her a taste of the life she secretly craved, a life without his temper, his brooding stares, and his constant need for control. Elaine spent the rest of the day shopping and meeting friends, carefully maintaining her facade. To the outside world, she was still the perfect wife, the charming hostess everyone adored. She felt invincible, untouchable. But Marcus was already setting his trap. The return home the following evening, Marcus returned home. As he stepped through the door, Elaine greeted him with her usual bright smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. She kissed his cheek and asked about his trip, her voice tinged with false sweetness. "It was fine," Marcus replied curtly, brushing past her. He could feel the tension crackling in the air, but Elaine seemed oblivious. She prattled on about her day, deliberately avoiding any mention of the plumbers or the repairs. That night, as they lay in bed, Marcus stared at the ceiling while Elaine drifted off to sleep. He was no longer angry in the way she might have expected. His rage had cooled into something far more dangerous, a cold, calculated determination to destroy her. Alan's findings the next morning, Marcus met Alan in a secluded spot near a construction site. Alan handed him a folder thick with evidence. "She's been busy," Alan said, lighting a cigarette. "The plumbers are just the tip of the iceberg." Marcus flipped through the pages. There were phone records showing late-night calls and texts to multiple men, emails detailing flirtations, and even receipts for lavish dinners she'd claimed were with friends. Alan had also uncovered the plumbers' identities, Jake and Chris Saunders, local contractors with a reputation for more than just fixing pipes. "Good work," Marcus said, his voice like steel. "Now let's make her regret every second of this." The plan takes shape. Marcus began laying the groundwork for his revenge. He started by installing more hidden cameras throughout the house, ensuring he wouldn't miss a thing. Then, he reached out to a lawyer, a brutal litigator known for his expertise in high-stakes divorces. Marcus wanted every legal advantage, every tool at his disposal. Over the next few days, Marcus played the part of the dutiful husband. He brought Elaine flowers, took her out to dinner, and even suggested a Elaine, unaware of his ulterior motives, responded with enthusiasm, thinking she had him wrapped around her finger once again. But behind the scenes, Marcus was orchestrating her downfall. The confrontation one evening, Marcus invited Elaine to sit down for a serious talk. She hesitated, sensing his tone was different, but eventually joined him at the kitchen table. "I've been thinking a lot about us," Marcus began, his voice calm but cold. "About where we went wrong." Elaine forced a smile. "Oh, Marcus, don't be so dramatic. Every marriage has rough patches." He leaned forward, locking eyes with her. "Is that what you call it? A rough patch?" Before she could respond, Marcus pulled out his phone and played the security footage. Elaine's face strained of color as she watched herself with the plumbers, her betrayal laid bare. I can explain," she stammered, her voice trembling. "It wasn't what it looked like." Marcus slammed his fist on the table, making her jump. "Don't insult me by lying. I know everything, Elaine. The plumbers, the texts, the dinners. You think I wouldn't find out?" Elaine burst into tears, her demeanor shifting from defiant to desperate. "Please, Marcus, I made a mistake. It didn't mean anything." Marcus stood, towering over her. "You think I care about your excuses? You made a choice, Elaine. And now you're going to pay for it." The calm before the storm. Elaine spent the next few days walking on eggshells, unsure of what Marcus would do next. He didn't yell or throw things. Instead, he was eerily calm, going about his business as though nothing had happened. But beneath the surface, Marcus was finalizing the final stages of his plan. He wanted her to feel safe, to think she had avoided the worst. Only then would he strike. Elaine's nerves were fraying. She couldn't sleep, couldn't focus, couldn't eat. Marcus's cold, detached demeanor was more terrifying than his temper. She tried to act normal, cleaning the house obsessively and cooking his favorite meals, but he barely acknowledged her. It was as if she no longer existed in his eyes, which was far worse than the shouting matches she had braced for. Marcus, however, was far from idle. While Elaine spent her days tiptoeing around him, he worked tirelessly to pull every lever available to him. His revenge would be thorough, and when it hit, it would destroy every aspect of her life. But for now, he let her stew in the suspense, her paranoia growing by the hour. A carefully planted seed. On a sunny Friday morning, Marcus left for work, as he'd done every day that week. But this time, he didn't actually head to his construction sites. Instead, he went to meet with a few people whose roles in his plan would be pivotal. First, he visited a friend of Alan's, a journalist with a taste for scandal. Marcus handed over a neatly compiled packet of evidence, including the security footage, texts, and emails Alan had uncovered. The journalist's eyes widened as he flipped through it. "This is gold," he said, a grin spreading across his face. "You sure you want this out there? It's going to blow up her life." "That's the idea," Marcus replied, his voice icy. "Make it public. Make it loud. She deserves it." Next, Marcus stopped by a local hardware store, picking up a few nondescript items. They wouldn't draw suspicion but would become crucial later. Finally, he met with his lawyer to finalize a plan that would blindside Elaine in court. By the end of the day, everything was in place. Elaine's false hope. That evening, Marcus returned home in a surprisingly good mood. He kissed Elaine on the cheek, complimented her cooking, and even suggested they watch a movie together. Elaine, desperate for some semblance of normalcy, clung to his sudden warmth like a lifeline. She convinced herself that maybe, just maybe, he was willing to forgive her. As they sat on the couch, Marcus casually mentioned that he'd arranged for some contractors to fix a few things around the house the following week. Since the plumbers botched the job upstairs, I figured we should get professionals in, he said, his tone light. Elaine stiffened but quickly forced a smile. Oh, of course. That's a great idea. Marcus noticed her unease but didn't press further. He simply smiled and let the subject drop, content knowing that his words had planted the seeds of dread in her mind. The first blow the next morning, Elaine woke up to find Marcus already gone. On the kitchen counter was a note, meeting contractors at the house this afternoon. Be here at 3 p.m. Her heart sank. She couldn't help but wonder if this was some kind of trap. At exactly 3 p.m., the doorbell rang. Elaine opened it to find two men standing there, not the contractors Marcus had mentioned, but Jake and Chris, the plumbers. Her heart pounded as she stared at them, her mind racing. What are you doing here? She stammered. Jake smirked. Your husband called us. Said there was some follow-up work to be done. Elaine's blood ran cold. She knew this wasn't a coincidence, but she had no choice but to let them in. As they worked, she hovered nervously, wondering if Marcus would show up. Hours passed, but he never did. By the time the plumbers left, Elaine was a wreck, certain that Marcus had orchestrated this just to torment her. The public spectacle on Monday morning, Elaine's phone began to buzz incessantly. At first, she ignored it, assuming it was spam. But when the buzzing didn't stop, she finally picked it up and froze. Her inbox was flooded with messages, texts from friends, emails from acquaintances, and notifications from social media. Someone had leaked the security footage. The video, showing her flirting with the plumbers and leading them upstairs, had gone viral overnight. The local gossip pages had picked it up, and from there, it spread like wildfire. Her name was trending, her reputation shredded. The comments were brutal, filled with mockery and disdain. Elaine screamed, throwing her phone across the room. Her hands shook as she tried to think of a way to contain the damage, but it was too late. The story was out, and there was no taking it back. Marcus strikes again as Elaine scrambled to salvage what was left of her reputation. Marcus was already preparing his next move. That afternoon, she received a knock at the door. A courier handed her a thick envelope, divorce papers. Elaine's hands trembled as she opened it. The terms were brutal. Marcus was seeking full ownership of their house, their shared assets, and even the dog. The accompanying letter from his lawyer made it clear that he intended to paint her as the sole party at fault, citing her infidelity as grounds for everything. Elaine's knees buckled. She knew Marcus wouldn't back down, and with the evidence he had, she stood no chance in court. He wasn't just divorcing her, he was erasing her from their life entirely. The final blow, but Marcus wasn't done yet. Over the next week, Elaine found herself ostracized from the community. Friends stopped returning her calls. Her book club kicked her out. Even the local grocery store clerk, who used to chat with her warmly, now greeted her with cold indifference. And then came the financial blow. Marcus had quietly drained their joint accounts before filing for divorce, leaving Elaine with nothing. She tried to access her credit cards, only to find they'd been cancelled. Desperate, she reached out to her parents for help, but even they were reluctant to intervene after hearing about her scandal. Elaine was alone, broke, and humiliated. Marcus's triumph as Marcus stood in the house he now owned outright, he surveyed the aftermath of his revenge with grim satisfaction. Elaine had been reduced to a shadow of her former self, forced to move into a dingy apartment on the edge of town. The plumbers, meanwhile, had been fired from their jobs after their names were linked to the scandal. For Marcus, this wasn't just about punishment, it was about reclaiming control. He had turned Elaine's betrayal into her downfall, ensuring she would never recover from the consequences of her actions. And as he poured himself a glass of whiskey, he allowed himself a rare smile. This was just the beginning of the life he planned to rebuild, without her. Elaine sat in her cramped, dimly lit apartment, staring at the peeling wallpaper. The place, every corner of her new reality was a harsh reminder of how far she had fallen. Her phone had become a weapon against her sanity. Every notification was another piece of gossip, another cruel comment, or another news article dissecting her public humiliation. She tried to avoid social media, but curiosity always won out. Every time she opened her apps, she saw her name trending for all the wrong reasons. Cheating wife caught on camera, local plumbers spill the pipes, from suburban queen to scandalous pariah. Elaine had become a meme, a punchline. She couldn't even go to the store without catching sideways glances and hushed whispers. Her anger began to shift from self-loathing to seething hatred for Marcus. He had orchestrated all of this. He hadn't just left her. He had ensured that every aspect of her life was obliterated. But as much as she despised him, she also feared him. Marcus wasn't just methodical, he was merciless. The unexpected opportunity Elaine was spiraling, her days blending into one another in a haze of wine and regret, when an unexpected message popped into her inbox. It was from Jake, one of the plumbers. "Hey Elaine, heard about what happened. Sorry for the mess. If you want to talk, I'm here." Her initial instinct was to ignore it. Jake was part of the problem, one of the reasons her life was in ruins. But as the hours passed and the silence in her apartment grew louder, the idea of talking to someone, anyone, became more appealing. She replied cautiously. They arranged to meet at a small diner on the outskirts of town. When Jake walked in, he looked just as charming as she remembered, but there was an edge to his smile now, a hint of nervousness. "Elaine," he said, sliding into the booth. "You okay?" She laughed bitterly. "Do I look okay?" Jake winced. "Yeah, I guess not. Look, I didn't think any of this would blow up the way it did. Your husband's intense." "That's putting it mildly," Elaine muttered. She looked at him sharply. "Why are you here, Jake? Sympathy?" Jake hesitated, then leaned in closer. "Let's just say I've got my own reasons for wanting to see your husband taken down a peg." Elaine raised an eyebrow. "Go on." Jake explained that Marcus had gone after him and his brother, too. They'd lost their jobs, their reputation in the industry, and several lucrative contracts. Marcus hadn't just destroyed Elaine, he had made sure that anyone involved in her betrayal paid the price. "I can't get work anywhere in this town," Jake said bitterly. "Chris is thinking of moving to another state. But me? I'd rather get even." Elaine's eyes gleamed with a flicker of hope. "And how exactly do you plan to do that?" Jake smiled, a slow, wicked grin that promised trouble. "I've got an idea." Marcus's growing confidence meanwhile, Marcus was thriving. With Elaine out of his life and his revenge executed perfectly, he poured all his energy into expanding his construction business. His reputation in the community was untarnished. If anything, people admired him for handling his betrayal so decisively. He had no interest in dating or romance. Trusting someone again seemed laughable. Instead, he focused on building wealth, power, and control. The house felt empty sometimes, but Marcus didn't mind. It was better than sharing it with someone who had betrayed him so deeply. But Marcus's success had made him complacent. He believed Elaine was broken, her spirit crushed beyond repair. What he didn't realize was that desperation could be a powerful motivator, and Elaine was no longer the docile wife he had once controlled. The conspiracy. Elaine and Jake began meeting regularly, their shared hatred for Marcus fueling their conversations. At first, they merely vented, about Marcus's ruthlessness, about their ruined lives. But over time, their conversations turned darker, more strategic. Jake revealed that he still had a copy of the security footage Marcus had leaked. "What if we flip the script?" he suggested one evening. "We could edit the footage, make it look like Marcus was involved somehow." Elaine shook her head. "No one would believe that. His reputation's too solid." Jake smirked. "Then we hit him where it really hurts, his business." He explained his plan to sabotage Marcus's construction sites. A few accidents, some falsified reports, and maybe even an anonymous tip to the local authorities about unsafe practices. Elaine hesitated at first, but the thought of watching Marcus's empire crumble was too tempting to resist. "I'm in," she said finally. "But this has to be airtight. If he finds out it was us, he won't," Jake assured her. "He thinks you're beaten. He won't see it coming." The first strike the plan began small. Elaine, using her knowledge of Marcus's schedule, provided Jake with the perfect opportunity to sneak onto one of his job sites. Late one night, Jake and a friend sabotaged a crane, ensuring it would malfunction the next day. When it did, it caused a costly delay that ate into Marcus's profits. Next, they targeted his suppliers, spreading rumors about Marcus's unreliability. Contracts began to fall through, and Marcus noticed his business taking hits from all sides. He couldn't pinpoint the source, but he felt the pressure mounting. Elaine, meanwhile, played the long game. She reached out to mutual friends, planting seeds of doubt about Marcus's integrity. She portrayed herself as the victim of his cruel revenge, painting him as a vindictive tyrant who had ruined her life out of spite. Slowly but surely, the tide began to turn. Marcus wasn't blind to the shift. He noticed the whispers, the sidelong glances at the grocery store, the way people hesitated before committing to contracts. At first, he thought it was just the natural fallout from the scandal. But when he discovered the sabotage at his job sites, his instincts kicked in. Someone was targeting him. Marcus began to investigate quietly, using the same methods he had once deployed against Elaine. He scoured security footage, tracked patterns, and kept a close eye on everyone in his orbit. It didn't take long for him to notice a familiar name popping up where it didn't belong: Jake Saunders. Realization hit him like a freight train. Jake wasn't acting alone. Elaine was behind this. And Marcus, true to his nature, wasn't going to let it slide. The realization that Elaine and Jake were conspiring against him reignited the fire in Marcus's veins. He had assumed Elaine was broken, incapable of fighting back. But her involvement in the sabotage revealed a level of cunning he hadn't anticipated. It both enraged him and sharpened his focus. If she wanted to play games, he'd make sure she regretted it. Marcus began by tightening the noose. He knew he had to play it carefully. Any direct confrontation would tip Elaine and Jake off. Instead, he leaned on his network, Alan and his investigator contacts, quietly gathering evidence. He needed proof not just to stop them but to destroy them permanently. Elaine's temporary victory, unaware that Marcus was onto her, Elaine felt emboldened. The small victories, delayed projects, lost contracts, and Marcus's growing frustration gave her a renewed sense of purpose. She even started dressing better, reclaiming the confidence she thought she had lost forever. Her meetings with Jake became more frequent, and their dynamic shifted. What had started as a partnership of convenience began to take on a romantic undertone. Jake's easy charm and shared hatred for Marcus made him the perfect confidant, and before long, Elaine found herself drawn to him in ways she hadn't expected. Jake, for his part, enjoyed the thrill of it all. He loved seeing Marcus suffer, and being with Elaine was just another way to twist the knife. But he wasn't as careful as Elaine. He let slip small details to his friends, bragging about the chaos they were causing. And one of those friends, as fate would have it, owed Marcus a favor. The trap: one evening, Marcus received a call from a mutual acquaintance who had overheard Jake's boasting. "You might want to check out Jake's place," the man said cryptically. "I heard something about plans to mess with your equipment again." Marcus didn't need more encouragement. That night, he parked his truck a block away from Jake's apartment and waited. Sure enough, Elaine arrived around 9 p.m., her car pulling into the lot. Marcus watched as she disappeared inside, his blood boiling but his mind calm and calculated. He had seen enough. The evidence he already had, combined with this, would be more than enough to turn the tables. Public exposure. The next morning, Marcus executed the first phase of his plan. He uploaded new footage to the same gossip site that had exposed Elaine's first scandal, but this time, it wasn't about infidelity. It was about conspiracy. The videos showed Jake sneaking onto Marcus's job sites, tampering with equipment, and leaving with Elaine. Accompanying the footage was a detailed account of the sabotage, and a growing list of financial damages. Marcus ensured the article painted Elaine as the mastermind, with Jake as her willing accomplice. The fallout was immediate. Elaine woke up to find her phone bombarded with messages once again, but this time, they weren't mocking her, they were furious. former friends and neighbors accused her of trying to ruin Marcus's livelihood. Even those who had initially sympathized with her turned their backs. Jake, too, found himself under fire. His attempts to secure new plumbing jobs dried up entirely as word spread of his involvement. The local news picked up the story, further cementing their reputations as vindictive, scheming pariahs. Legal maneuvers, but Marcus wasn't done. He filed a lawsuit against both Elaine and Jake, seeking damages for the sabotage. His lawyer, a bulldog of a man with a reputation for leaving his opponents in financial ruin, assured him they had an airtight case. Elaine panicked. She knew she couldn't afford a legal battle, especially not with the little money she had left. Jake tried to reassure her, but his confidence wavered as Marcus's legal team bore down on them. He began to distance himself, leaving Elaine to fend for herself. By the time the court date arrived, Elaine was a shadow of her former self. She tried to plead her case, claiming Marcus had fabricated the evidence, but the overwhelming proof against her left the judge with little choice. The court ruled in Marcus's favor, ordering Elaine and Jake to pay substantial damages. It was a financial death sentence. Elaine lost the meager savings she had left, while Jake was forced to sell his truck and tools just to cover his share. Neither of them had any hope of recovering. Jake's betrayal desperate and humiliated, Elaine turned to Jake for support, but he had grown resentful. He blamed her for dragging him into the mess and for Marcus's retaliation. One night, during a heated argument, he stormed out of her apartment, leaving her alone once again. Elaine called him repeatedly, but Jake ignored her. Days turned into weeks, and eventually, she learned he had skipped town entirely. He left without a word, abandoning her to deal with the aftermath on her own. The realization hit her like a brick. She had no allies left, no safety net, and no way out. Marcus had taken everything from her, and now, even Jake had turned his back. Marcus's final move with Elaine and Jake out of the picture, Marcus turned his attention to rebuilding his reputation. He reached out to the clients who had hesitated to work with him, presenting himself as the victim of a malicious scheme. His charm and professionalism won them over, and soon, his business was thriving again. But Marcus wasn't satisfied with merely surviving. He wanted to ensure Elaine could never recover. Using his connections, he spread word of her involvement in the sabotage to every potential employer in the area. By the time he was done, Elaine's name was blacklisted from every respectable job in town. Elaine, broke and desperate, tried to leave Willow Heights, but her reputation followed her. Wherever she went, people had heard the story of the cheating wife turned saboteur. She was forced to take menial jobs under a fake name, scraping by in anonymity. A life ruined months later, Marcus stood in his pristine house, looking out the window at the neighborhood that had once whispered about him. Now they greeted him warmly, praising his resilience and determination. Elaine, meanwhile, had become a cautionary tale, a symbol of betrayal and its consequences. As Marcus sipped his whiskey, a rare smile crossed his face. His revenge had been complete, calculated, and devastating. Elaine's life was in ruins, and he had emerged stronger than ever. For Marcus, it wasn't just about retribution. It was about reclaiming control, and ensuring that those who crossed him never forgot the cost. Elaine sat in the back room of a dingy diner in a nearby town, her once manicured hands now calloused from scrubbing dishes. She worked long hours for meager pay, her dreams of reclaiming her life fading with each passing day. Every time she thought about Marcus, her chest tightened with a mix of rage and despair. He had dismantled her existence piece by piece, leaving her with nothing but the echoes of her old life to haunt her. Her coworkers barely spoke to her, sensing something broken in her that couldn't be fixed. Her manager barked orders at her without so much as a glance, and customers never acknowledged her presence. Elaine had become invisible, a ghost haunting the edges of a world she no longer belonged to. But she wasn't ready to accept this as her final chapter. Marcus might have crushed her, but deep down, a flicker of defiance still burned. She just needed an opportunity, a way to claw her way back to the surface and make him pay for what he had done. Marcus's new life, Marcus, meanwhile, was thriving. His construction business had not only recovered but expanded, thanks to his reputation for resilience and integrity. Clients admired his ability to handle adversity, and his projects were in high demand. He had transformed the narrative, turning himself into a symbol of strength and accountability. Yet, for all his success, Marcus remained haunted by the scars of betrayal. He couldn't shake the memories of Elaine's laughter with Jake, or the look on her face when he'd confronted her. He didn't regret what he had done, but he couldn't deny that it had changed him. He had become colder, more calculating, and less trusting of the world around him. His nights were often spent alone, the silence of his home a stark contrast to the chaos that had once filled it. He told himself he didn't need companionship, that he was better off this way. But a part of him wondered if he would ever truly feel whole again. The unexpected encounter one evening, Marcus decided to treat himself to dinner at a high-end restaurant in the city. As he sipped his whiskey at the bar, a woman caught his eye. She was striking, with dark hair and piercing green eyes, exuding a confidence that reminded him of a time before his marriage had turned sour. She noticed him watching and smiled, walking over with deliberate grace. "You look like a man who's seen the world," she said, sliding onto the stool next to him. Marcus chuckled. "More than I care to admit." Her name was Vanessa, a sharp, ambitious lawyer who had recently moved to the area. Their conversation flowed effortlessly, and for the first time in years, Marcus felt a spark of genuine connection. By the end of the night, they exchanged numbers, and Marcus left the restaurant with a rare sense of optimism. But as his life seemed to be turning a new page, Elaine was watching from the shadows. Elaine had tracked Marcus down to the restaurant. She hadn't planned to confront him, not yet, but seeing him smiling and relaxed, talking to a beautiful woman, made her blood boil. While she struggled to survive, he was thriving, moving on as though she had never existed. Her anger turned into obsession. She began following him, lurking outside his job sites and watching his house from a distance. She studied his routines, noting when he left and returned home, when he met with clients, and when he went out on personal errands. The more she watched, the more her hatred festered. Elaine wasn't sure what her endgame was, but she knew one thing: she couldn't let Marcus move on without consequences. Vanessa's discovery. As Marcus and Vanessa's relationship blossomed, they began spending more time together. Vanessa, perceptive and intuitive, noticed something unusual about Marcus. He was attentive and kind, but there was a guardedness about him that suggested unresolved wounds. One evening, as they shared a bottle of wine at his house, Vanessa gently pressed him. "You're amazing, Marcus. But I feel like you're holding something back. What happened to you?" Marcus hesitated, then decided to tell her the truth. He recounted his marriage to Elaine, her betrayal, and the revenge he had taken. He didn't sugarcoat it, explaining how he had systematically destroyed her life. Vanessa listened carefully, her expression unreadable. When he finished, she said, "That's intense. I can't say I blame you, but have you ever thought about what it's done to you?" Marcus frowned. "What do you mean?" "You built this life on top of scorched earth, Marcus. But have you really let go of it? Or is it still controlling you?" Her words lingered in his mind long after she left that night. Elaine's desperate move. Elaine's obsession reached a breaking point when she saw Vanessa leaving Marcus's house late one evening. The sight of another woman occupying the life she had once had pushed her over the edge. She couldn't sit idly by any longer. The next day, she wrote a letter and mailed it to Vanessa's office. It was a detailed account of Marcus's revenge, painting him as a cruel, vindictive man who had destroyed her out of spite. Elaine included just enough evidence to make the story seem credible, hoping to drive a wedge between them. Vanessa received the letter a few days later. She read it carefully, her expression growing darker with every word. When she finished, she didn't call Marcus right away. Instead, she began her own quiet investigation, determined to uncover the truth. The confrontation. When Vanessa finally confronted Marcus, she was armed with both Elaine's letter and the results of her research. She laid it all out on the table, demanding answers. "Is it true?" she asked, her voice steady but cold. Did you destroy her life like this? Marcus didn't deny it. I told you the truth, Vanessa. She betrayed me, and I made her pay for it. Vanessa shook her head. But this goes beyond revenge. This is obsession, Marcus. Do you even see what you've become? Her words cut deeper than Marcus expected. He tried to defend himself, but Vanessa wouldn't hear it. I need time to think, she said finally, leaving him alone with his thoughts. For the first time, Marcus began to question whether his revenge had truly been worth it. But as he wrestled with his conscience, Elaine was already planning her next move. Elaine sat in her darkened apartment, the silence broken only by the soft rustling of papers spread across her coffee table. They were old records, photos, and a few legal documents, relics of her life before Marcus had destroyed it. She stared at them, her mind racing. Her obsession had consumed her, but now she had clarity. If Marcus wanted to strip her of everything, she'd return the favor, one piece at a time. But Elaine wasn't just thinking of sabotage anymore. She wanted revenge to cut as deeply into Marcus's life as his had into hers. And she knew exactly how to strike, through Vanessa. Marcus's growing isolation, Vanessa's confrontation had shaken Marcus. For the first time, he began to doubt the righteousness of his actions. He had thought of himself as a man reclaiming his dignity, but Vanessa's words forced him to confront the truth. Perhaps his revenge had gone too far. Perhaps he had crossed a line and become someone even he didn't recognize. Vanessa had distanced herself, needing time to process what she had learned. Without her presence, Marcus felt the familiar loneliness creep back in, more oppressive than ever. He couldn't shake the feeling that his enemies weren't finished with him yet. Elaine's gambit. Elaine began her plan with a series of anonymous messages sent to Vanessa. Using a burner phone, she fed her cryptic details about Marcus's past that painted him as a dangerous, controlling man. She exaggerated some of the truth but kept enough factual elements to make her story believable. Vanessa, though conflicted, couldn't ignore the information. She started to dig deeper into Marcus's history, seeking out former acquaintances and old colleagues. What she found was a pattern of intensity and control, traits Marcus had wielded to protect himself but which, out of context, painted him as volatile and domineering. The turning point: one evening, Marcus decided to confront Vanessa directly. He showed up unannounced at her apartment, his face a mixture of frustration and vulnerability. "Vanessa," he began, "I can't lose you over this." She crossed her arms, her expression guarded. "I don't know if I can trust you, Marcus. I've learned things that make me question everything. I've made mistakes," Marcus admitted. "I won't deny that. But everything I did was because I was betrayed, because I was hurt." Vanessa's eyes softened slightly, but she didn't back down. "You can't keep using your pain as an excuse. At some point you have to let go. Otherwise, you'll destroy everyone around you, including yourself." Her words hit harder than Marcus wanted to admit. He left her apartment that night feeling hollow, unsure of how to move forward. But Elaine's plan was far from over. The ultimate betrayal. Elaine's next move was bold. She crafted a fake story implicating Marcus in a fraudulent business scheme. Using forged documents, she sent an anonymous tip to the local authorities and several news outlets. The allegations were serious enough to warrant an investigation, and soon, Marcus's construction sites were swarming with inspectors. Clients began pulling out of projects, unwilling to be associated with potential scandal. Marcus, blindsided, scrambled to contain the damage, but the smear campaign had already taken root. Elaine watched from afar, a grim satisfaction spreading through her as she saw Marcus's empire begin to crack. The trap closes as Marcus's business faltered. Vanessa re-entered the picture. She had been following the news, torn between her feelings for Marcus and the growing evidence against him. When he reached out to her, desperate for an ally, she reluctantly agreed to meet. "I don't know what's happening," Marcus said, his voice edged with exhaustion. "But someone is trying to destroy me." Vanessa studied him carefully. "Do you think it's Elaine?" "I know it is," Marcus growled. "She's the only one with a motive. Vanessa frowned. Then why haven't you stopped her? Marcus clenched his fists. Because she's careful. I need proof, and I don't have it yet. Vanessa hesitated, then leaned forward. I can help you. But you need to promise me something. What? That this ends when you clear your name. No more revenge. No more destruction. Marcus stared at her, torn. Finally, he nodded. I promise. Vanessa's agreement renewed his determination. With her help, Marcus began piecing together the threads of Elaine's plot, using Vanessa's legal expertise to track the origins of the forged documents and anonymous tips. Elaine's overconfidence became her downfall. She had grown reckless, believing Marcus was too distracted to fight back. But when she attempted to plant false evidence of safety violations at one of his sites, Marcus was ready. He had installed hidden cameras after the earlier sabotage attempts, and this time, they caught Elaine red-handed. The footage showed her sneaking onto the site, placing forged documents in a contractor's office, and leaving in a hurry. When Marcus reviewed the footage, a cold smile spread across his face. He had everything he needed. The reckoning Marcus wasted no time. He filed charges against Elaine for trespassing, fraud, and defamation, presenting the footage as irrefutable evidence. The legal system moved quickly, and Elaine was arrested within days. The story made headlines, further tarnishing her already ruined reputation. As she sat in a holding cell, Elaine's defiance crumbled. She had played her last card and lost. Marcus had outmaneuvered her at every turn, and now there was no escape. The aftermath, with Elaine behind bars and his name cleared, Marcus focused on rebuilding his life once more. Vanessa, impressed by his resolve and honesty, decided to give their relationship another chance. Slowly, Marcus began to let go of the anger that had consumed him for so long. Elaine, on the other hand, faced a bleak future. Her arrest and conviction left her unemployable, her reputation beyond repair. Even after serving her sentence, she remained an outcast, a cautionary tale whispered about in the community she once ruled. Marcus's victory. Standing on the deck of his house one evening, Marcus looked out over the neighborhood. The air was calm, the sky painted with the colors of sunset. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of peace. His battles were over, and he had emerged stronger. As Vanessa joined him, slipping her hand into his, Marcus knew he had a chance at a fresh start. The ghosts of his past might never fully disappear.
Oh my god. Another really good one. I really hope you enjoyed this Reddit story video. I had a great time reading this. If you want more of this kind of content, just leave a comment, let me know. Follow my channel. I'm really trying to hit 1,000 subs before the end of the year. And we can do it. It's going to happen, guys. Thank you so much. Now, everybody have a great night and have a sweet dreams.